Hello, family. I'm Janaya Future Khan, and this is Dark Woke. Just before we hit it, I want to say thank you to all the listeners out there, and a special shout out to the supporters who make this show possible. It truly means the world to me. If you'd like to become a member, our Patreon is linked in the episode right up below. Hello, family. I thought we were going to talk about Reconstruction today, and it turns out that we are, but it needs to be a continuation, because while I'm glad that we can get an endless array of random disjointed facts about Black history from random people, which I'm not opposed to, by the way, especially now. I don't mind that people are talking about it, but to what end? You remember when Maya Rudolph, y'all know I love coming back to this. Remember when Maya Rudolph was playing Dionne Warwick on Unbreakable, Kimmy Schmidt? And she goes, why would Xi Jinping want to flood my basement and rust my Bowflex? To what end? Like, best line. Okay, back to this. I went on the internet, 2 minutes. I got a Rachel Dolezal video, and I was like, you know what? I'm not even mad at her anymore. Things have gotten so serious. She might be the only white woman in America that's that committed to talking about race. But still, silly bird, right? I have been thinking through how to continue yesterday. So really quickly, in yesterday's episode, a consistent theme was, isn't it weird? Isn't it weird that every single thing that is happening right now is a direct result of racism? And isn't it weird that it's the 100th anniversary of Black History Month in Black History Month? Well, everybody's anti-race, but nobody's talking about race in any way, shape, or form, even though the Trump administration's agenda has disproportionately impacted Black Americans more than anyone else. I want to be really clear about something. I'm not a Black American. Why am I saying that right now? It's that we all understand that I don't personally benefit or gain from any of this. And I shouldn't have to say that, but I do, because the more that I peel back and look at things from a historical and a contemporary analysis, I know that so much of how we approach this thing is based on assumption, is based on unarticulated expectations. It almost renders me a little bit inarticulate myself, right? So right now I'm just going to move into things really, really quickly. I'm going to locate us by picking up where we left off yesterday, and I'll tell you exactly where. But before we do, what I'm not going to do is further substantiate in, egregious detail the points that I made yesterday. You can go on AmericanProgress.org. Trump's agenda is a direct threat to the Black middle class. So that's one. And then the other article is from the Griot. And a big reason for why they are so disjointed is there's no Black media. Nobody's writing about Black anything anywhere with any consistency. That was one of the first journalistic bodies, platforms that ended up getting killed off, and then the Black journalists were left. And it doesn't seem to matter that everything is race related in America, because that's America, baby. Here we are. So I am going to circle back to that Black middle class piece, but it's going to happen in an organic way. And again, I'm emphasizing the reason that I am tackling things this way, I'm timing myself to make sure that I don't yap too much, is I don't trust that we'd actually be receptive to the things that I'm saying in the meaningful way that I want us to be, which is to say, we've not done a good job in the way that we approach race, think about race. It's become so hard, apparently, and so impenetrable, even though it shapes every aspect of our lives and personhood, even though it's a story that every single one of us has to work against at some point in our lives, right? It's just that in some stories, you get to be the hero. And in other stories, you're nothing at all. Either way, there's not much choice in the matter. There's just more choice for some people. But why this is all important? Yesterday, I emphasized what mattered when it came to Reconstruction and how it's the most direct parallel in American history that I can think of, right? Reconstruction era, 10 years, right? But really the backlash of that 10-year period, and then what happened after, right? The invention of racism as we know it, the racial thoughts. I'm going to use two examples that have just happened. And of course, one of them is Jasmine Crockett. And we're really going to hammer in this idea of race versus class because it's often used as a justification across from the liberal to the left for not talking about race. Because before we can actually meaningfully talk about Black history, which is the one place where people can kind of stomach it as long as it's Martin Luther King and sometimes Harriet, but never slavery, right? Just the stories around it, just the ones that make us feel good. But those pervasive thoughts, the mythologies, the stereotypes that became the foundation for American society is still shaping our experiences today. And we have bent over backwards. We've done mental gymnastics to not have to deal with it or confront it. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to destroy any of these arguments once and for all. By the way, the article for the Griot, I just wanted to make sure that I left that part. 10 actions from Trump in 2025 that critically impacted Black America. You understand, by the way, no shade to the Griot. But you know what it means? The Griot was like the least impactful one for a long time when it came to Black platforms. Now it's literally the only one that really reports on contemporary Black issues that is not focused on entertainment first. We're useless like the Shade Room. Really quickly though, the House voted to end the government shutdown, right? They bought time for ICE talks. Shut up, Hakeem. We know that Schumer and Hakeem are useless and weak. The DHS, of course, will be funded through until February 13th. And then they're going to be negotiating that budget, whatever that means. It needs to mean something. But the main crux of yesterday's episode, Beyond the Parallel, was Homeland versus America, right? These two competing ideologies. And I'm going to further substantiate that, okay? Where I want to start with this is, I had this whole layout, and I want to change it around. So we talked about the fact that I've written down so many notes that I'm actually looking at my laptop, which I don't often have to do. I want to make sure that I locate this in what matters. Okay. So for one, I learned something I didn't know, right? We talked about equality and we talk about, America changing, America being different, America being better, America making right with Black people, America confronting its history. What I didn't know was that already happened. This isn't some pipe dream. It happened for 10 years. For 10 years, Black Americans, just recently formerly enslaved, suddenly were recognized as people with personhood and citizenship, right? The right to vote. And were actually in, state senates because they could vote and they voted each other in. And that was true for 10 years. Imagine where this entire country would be. Imagine how different it would look, right? What we're really going to be talking about is, where did all this weird racial resentment come from? It's really, again, it's weird that we're talking about everything except for race. And I want to be clear. What do we think immediately when we say race? Black. In the same way you think woke, Black. Right? DEI, Black. But do we think, and when we're making all of our DEI jokes, I'm talking about me, I've made several, right? But we didn't take it really seriously. It didn't seem to matter at all. But it was devastating. It is devastating, and it will devastate several generations of Black people to come. But that's just not important to the left. And I've been thinking about that. I've been thinking about this race versus class thing. And I've been thinking about the preoccupation with transness. And, I've sort of moved on from that. There's nowhere to go with it. But a couple of things happened today, or clicked for me today, that I want to capture. So one, I'm going to just very briefly tell you about Jasmine Crockett. And then two, I want to tell you, I'm going to play a video for you that's going to knock your socks off. Okay. So for those of you who don't know, I'm not going to get into this. I didn't even want to pull a clip for it because it's so annoying. Jasmine Crockett there's a black girl, right, who honestly had a white sensibility. Like if they had any of us on their team, we would know. Anyway, so some random black girl, I chose not to play this yesterday because it didn't feel substantiated. And I was like, I was there with that weird, Aziz Ansari takedown, which shouldn't have happened. And I'm not contributing to anything like that in my fucking life. So she's going on and she's saying, Tallarico, of course, you have a couple of folks vying supremacy on our side. You got your Allred, you got your Crockett, and you've got your Tallarico, right? Okay. Here's what happens. Some random black girl online, right? Again, very white sensibility, but that's an inside joke for us. She gets on and she says, Tallarico referred to Allred as a mediocre black man, something like that in his campaign. And I was like, I don't care. This is so stupid. I moved on. I also was like, I don't trust you. I don't know you. That ended up being a much larger story. It got into the press. A lot of the left-wing entities that we know, those platforms, right? The Majority Report. And I like Emma Vigilant. I like Sam Cedar enough, but I am, again, still growing and developing and comprehending. And the significance of our refusal to critically engage with race is really, I don't think I can ever unsee it. I think I tried not to for a really long time. I'm right there with you. I don't want to talk about race. But then I thought, why the fuck not? Why not? Why are we all so weird about this shit? We really don't have to be. And we must choose not to be moving forward. But anyway, so she goes and says that the news media picks it up. And it turns out that it was unsubstantiated. Tallarico had referred to her campaign, like to Allred's campaign as mediocre. He hadn't said mediocre black man. It wouldn't matter to me if he fucking did. Right? So what happens? Allred, who's a fucking loser, another sensibility that's questionable. You don't come for me unless I send for you. I'm like, you don't talk that way. You don't talk that way. You know what I mean? Like you're feeling really ballsy because Tallarico looks like he can't fight, but I don't know. His hips are loose, y'all. He might be able to throw down. He's wiry. Anyway, so Tallarico responds by apologizing. And that gets picked up in the news. And then right-wing news really picks it up because they love division, right? They love division. They love race bullshit. This is right up their fucking alley because they don't want Tallarico to win. It is ideal for them that a Crockett wins because she's a great target for Donald Trump. And for a long time, for a really long time, actually, that was all we needed, right? Not literally, by the way. That was something else that we just named people who are virulently anti-Trump. Mainly, I think we were just relieved that some people were. But Crockett is not a good rap by any stretch of the imagination. I really don't care that it's her or not, as long as it's one of ours for now. But I do believe Tallarico is the best option. So he's forced to apologize. And then it comes out that this whole thing was unsubstantiated. What does that do? What does that do? How is that perceived? Right? So what happened? All of a sudden, the entire vocal political pundit left, right? From the Media Matters, from a Majority Report, and a bunch of just yappers who are part of that ilk, right? Around, pretty extensive. I'm not interested in it's what we can draw. All of a sudden, everybody was disgusted. And all of these white liberal to lefties were like, see, it's these identity politics. You can't keep using it. And what got me, though, was how I don't hear a full racial analysis for anything. They'll repost Ilhan Omar and stuff. They'll be like, oh, my go. But there's not really in-depth focus or meaningful engagement in any sustained way, in any non-sustained way, in any meaningful way, in any non-meaningful way. And so I was surprised, not literally, y'all, at how quickly suddenly there was an adeptness with the racial analysis, right? And they kept using identity politics, and it started to really fucking piss me off, because what does that mean? Black. In the same way that what woke means black, DI means black. And these types of betrayals happen all the time. And again, it's what it does to morale. It's how quickly even anti-slavery white people, and I'm making that distinction on purpose. I'm clear. There is homeland, and there is America. If you believe and are pushing for some post-racial meritocracy, right, and want that to be true, you might not be against the white nationalist part. You're still over there. You're still over there. If anyone who refuses to meaningfully engage in race discourse to build power, to me, is not useful at this stage, because, and I'm going to explain why. And of course, everybody's welcome, and I want to make sure everybody's. But I think though I'm in a period of study. So let me I want to make sure I'm moving this along. Okay, so it really got my attention though how quick that people were shot from the hip, and the identity politics, right? And if they had relationships with black folk, it would be so easy to reprimand this person, the lack of journalistic due diligence, the use of race in this matter, without having to constantly dunk or use it. But they don't care, or they don't know how to, right? And it's just not important. And I think I'm okay, cool. Then my job is to figure out how to make it important or so normal in all this work on somewhere that I think we can do that together. That it's actually really easy not to throw black people under the bus. I don't know if you guys know this. I don't know if anyone else in America knows, but it's really easy to not throw black people under the bus. I'm really sitting because I think it's really hitting me the extent to which black Americans have had everything stolen from them. Right? That's, of course, right in line with indigenous folks. And you know what? We'll spend a whole fucking series on that too. But it's real. And I'm about to tell you just how much. Okay. So one of the, but first, actually, let's play this other clip. You guys aren't going to believe this. So this is in Minneapolis, right? And I'm going to connect all of this, right? But this is in Minneapolis. It is a bunch of, our folks, right? Anti-ICE, fighting or yelling at an ICE agent. So an asshole, Craigslist hire, but he happens to be black. Corey, let's pull this up. I want you to listen to the whole thing. It's pay attention throughout. I guess I want to say right close to the beginning, and then again really closely at the end. Okay, to my family, lock in.
That kind of energy, we should rip people apart from their families.
Are you a man?
Wow, is that a question?
Wow.
Okay. How do you feel about ripping people from their families?
Excuse me,
Does that feel good?
Fucking house nigga in here. Sir, I need to move. Fucking house nigga working for the fucking KKK. What's wrong with you people?
Why are you calling a woman a man? I mean, what kind of a guy does that?
Fucking house nigga, bitch.
Neighbor.
Who heard that? Did you guys hear that? Did you hear the house nigger? The hard R? Let's actually deconstruct this for a second, okay? Because this is exactly what I'm talking about when I'm saying our refusal to have any kind of racial analysis, even though everything about how these entities are operating, to me, this guy is no different than a cop, a black cop, right? It's no different. And still, the permission to you, did you need to And I'm going to tell you exactly how it happened because rhetoric is my thing. If you pay attention to the video, he's being, this officer, this agent, I would call him this fucking piece of shit, is being accosted, right? He's being asked, how could you split families apart? How can you live with yourself? And his response is what, right? Some kind of attempt to make a transphobic jab, right? Are you a man? Right? Oh, I can't tell what you are. Are you even a man? Are you a man? I don't know, right? That's the point. He's trying to incite you. And if you pay attention from the moment that he says that, the person almost doesn't even, and the whole side almost doesn't even know what to say, right? What kind of question is that? And what's happening with that individual is that he's working his way up to say something worse, right? You took a stab at me, I'm going to take a stab at you. And what was that? Okay, you're a house nigger. You're a house nigger. And why did he give himself permission? Because the joke could be inferred, obviously, as anti-trans. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting that you could be offended by the presumption, or, I don't even care. Let's say it was the absolute reality of transphobia or transphobic joke or attempt at it, right? The joke is, though, it wasn't even a full thing. It was a jab. And that's all it took. House nigger. One stupid black girl online. Identity politics. What got blamed for the Democrats always losing? Who gets blamed for that, right? What practice? What is it? Identity politics, right? What are we saying? Black people. What happened with the Sanders campaign? Right? What happened? Well, they had black people weren't buying in, right? Black people said, hey, you guys have a race problem. All of these people who think that they're leftists are kind of scary racists, some of them, Maybe do something about that. Oh, here you come with your identity politics again. Meanwhile, the entire time, it's been who? Centrist Democrats who have used identity politics because liberals did. Because both liberals and centrist Democrats and white people on the left accepted the version of identity politics that the right recycled and threw back. Because if you actually know what identity politics means, you know that it's actually just inclusion. And it was made, because of course, who generates discourse and language? It was made by the Combahee River Collective, which is a group of Black feminists that wanted to find a way to not, like flipping over the table. They were like, what use was that? More seats at the table. That's what it fucking meant. That's its origin and the need for that. That plurality of thought, ingenuity. It didn't just create more of an equal opportunity environment, but it was essential to success. So the joke is, again, if you actually knew any Black people, we could be generating more language, but instead you're using a tool designed by Black folks to beat on Black folks. Whether you know you're doing it or not is useless. It's inconsequential. If the result is the same, the desire is whether it's acknowledged or not, is to silence Black people. Why? Because, well, it's the Negro problem. It's the race problem. It goes right back to Reconstruction. You just don't want to deal with it, right? We just don't want to deal with Black people. We just don't want to, they make everything so hard, don't they? No, they don't. In fact, Black people in America are the only reason why everything is easy for the vast majority of people in America. But I'm going to break down every one of these dumbass fucking arguments really quickly, okay? But that should piss you off. I want to remind you that, again, the only trustworthy indicators of quality of life in America are what? Race and class. They're the only ones. You can go through any other filter. The only thing that I would argue is not a third, it's almost like a squared, is ability. But ability and really disability justice and your access to care is so directly informed by race and class that it's almost intrinsic. But anyway, right? What do leftists do though? Let's go into the justifications, right? Because nobody's saying, I don't want to hear from Black people. Oh, I don't want to deal with it. What they're saying is that you're being divisive and you're playing identity politics, right? And the best argument I've heard, and I always start and I only care about the best argument. I don't go for weak is silly. I don't win that way. I want the best argument. The best argument I've heard is that if we, and this is the best argument from the left, and again, called the so-called left, because are we left if we don't care about race? I don't know. Okay. And I just want to name something, an emotion, which is rare for me. I want to be lighter. I hope that this is coming across in the spirit that it's intended, but it's like, I really hate this stuff. And when I say this stuff, I don't actually mean talking about race. It's actually as stupid as it is fascinating. The fact that we've just decided that people are just some way because of the accident of the color of one's skin. But that it's 2026 and it's all there. We've all done this before, but we're losing the recipes. And it's the fact that, there's a level of diligence that we have to bring in, bringing those recipes back. I can't skip steps. So the best argument I heard is, okay, but if we create more class balanced incentives policy, it increases people's overall quality of life, and that includes Black people. Great argument, right? So the argument, again, is if we're class first, right? We only care about class. We're class first because if more people have more, then some of these racial tensions and the angst will subside, right? And I can appreciate why you might believe that. But what it tells me is that you don't read and you don't know anything about American history. And now I'm going to tell you why. Okay? Again, I want to go back to the abolitionists. So pro-slavery and the anti-slavery movement. Nothing slaps like a little water. Because I'm talking about ashy people here, y'all. The throat is feeling the ash. Okay. Pro-slavery, anti-slavery. That was the only point where they diverged. They were all very okay with the continued subjugation of Black Americans. That was not a problem. In fact, every single right, the right to vote, office, own land, be a person, a human being, operate like a person in America. All of that for 10 years, we had the America that everyone keeps saying we could have. It already happened. It's not a pipe dream. And then decades were spent taking away every single one of those rights. Ask yourself, how much wealth did Black people have generated in those 10 years? Now, I'm asking you to consider how much wealth Black people could have generated in those 10 years, right? When they went from slave to non-slave, right? Before Jim Crow, before all these things, right? Probably not that much. Now, I want you to compare it to the 400 and something years of wealth that white people were able to accumulate. So this is at a time when white people have so much more, that it would be that what Black people were making and doing was almost inconsequential to some of the most powerful people and even the most non-powerful people, right? They had enough. And yet they went out of their way to dismantle all of those rights. Why? Okay, cool. You might blame it on the poor whites. Okay. So why I'm bringing up this whole Negro problems, I actually don't see the current iteration of the left as all that different. You don't want at all. We're all against slavery. We're all against slavery. The ones who aren't are very open about it on the other side. Right? But that doesn't mean that you're against racism. And it doesn't mean that you care about Black people. It doesn't even mean that you're pro-Black. And again, I'm interested in now the development of a Black sensibility. That to me is key. But what do I mean? Okay, so we had Reconstruction those brilliant 10 years, okay? 1870s to the 80s. And by the way, the sources, there's going to be a bunch more down, but it's mostly Fauner, who is the penultimate historian on this era, a white guy. Right. His writing is fantastic, Eric Fauner. And then, of course, Henry Louis Gates Jr., who also speaks very highly of him. We had dinner at another day, for another time and another day, right? So this is what we know. This is what's usually told, right? Poor white men formed coalitions with wealthy plantation owners to overthrow biracial governments, right? That means not the biracial that we think of, not them light brights that just be yapping with the white sensibilities. Not when they have a black mom, but when they have a black mom, they don't identify as biracial. But this is black stuff, okay? But when they say biracial, they mean where black people and white people were in government together. They worked together to overthrow. They invented racism as we know it today in those 10 years through visuals, images, stories, graphics. You remember? Big eyes, big red lips, right? Lascivious, lazy, scoundrels, rapey, all of that. The Sambo, right? The Sambo. That's why Frederick Douglass had to invent the concept of the new Negro that Du Bois would pick up on and would carry on. And we still have iterations all the way up to Barack Obama, right? So the new Negro has our perfect black man that can emulate all of the things that, the white man can do, sometimes even better. Right? There's been lots of iterations that come out of it. Basically, what I'm saying is we're still the same basic dummies we've always been, right? But that's what they did. So they literally attacked all of these black folks who were just being good citizens and wanting to participate. Imagine what it took. Imagine how much you'd have to identify a place as your only home after living here generationally for hundreds of years. You no longer have a connection to anywhere else. You are living amongst the people who honestly allowed this to happen for hundreds of years. And you still, one of the things that Gates said that haunts me is what's often missed is that sense of jubilee and possibility amongst African Americans in those 10 years. Knowing that breaks my fucking heart. But more than that, it makes me fucking mad and certain that the stories that we have told ourselves and each other are bullshit. And we're not chasing something fake. We're chasing something that was real and was taken away by Homeland and by people who are okay with Homeland. They're okay with living in Homeland. They'll choose the myths. Let them choose the myths. Right. So then, so they sacrificed those economic policies that they could have benefited from for social supremacy over black citizens. A lot of those stereotypes and just the racism, like black women, lazy, disgusting, black men, lazy, criminal, deviant, right? Whore is a black woman. Yeah, all of that was used to justify this. Guess what's continued, right? Dr. Gates would refer to the end of slavery as an introduction to neo-slavery, which then brought on the Jim Crow era, right, with sharecropping. And we know that there are Black Americans who are at least one or two that are still alive from that era. But let's go to Jim Crow then. So now we can go to Jim Crow, right? What happened? Well, working class whites in the South, they supported politicians who maintained segregation despite living in economic crisis and enduring poor material conditions. Right? Again, prioritizing racial status over economic advancement. Now, we've heard, and I've said, and arguably some of you have said, I'm sure some of you have said, because this is a tagline that we use because it's correct. Yeah, but white people, vote against their interests all the time. It's actually so much more insidious. Our argumentation has to be better because we've got to make this case well. This can't be allowed to continue. Okay? So, right now, I'm going to put this whole thing to bed, this race versus class thing. And what's great about when I get to do things like this is I collect more and more and more and more and more. So, and then I can easily dismantle these arguments. So, of course, the idea that race was privileged over class allowed white people to maintain a social hierarchy, even if it came at a material cost. But it's very easy to say, well, that was them, though. That was those white people. It's not today. And, it's different now. Okay, cool. Let's talk. So different. Why are civil rights protections from 1965 being eroded and destroyed as we speak still? I want you to think about this. 1877 was the last time that they needed to make massive strikes against any kinds of Black rights to vote, etc. So then, when was the next time? Oh, right, 1965. What was everybody doing then? Were Black people just making a money hand over fist? Right? All the promises that were made. You know, that's why so many Black folks fought in the war, risked their lives to fight insurrectionists. That wasn't a civil war. Right? The 40 acres and a mule thing, right? Because they built the entire wealth of this country. America didn't have fucking money before cotton. Cotton was king. Cotton was everything. Chattel slavery. They didn't want to let it go. You see what I'm saying here? There is no, and I'm going to keep hitting these arguments, but there was no race versus class in America. You stupid, stupid dum-dums. Talking to whoever. Racial capital, if you read, you'd know. You want to know what the most damning thing, if you just think about it, a little bit about history, right? Oh, Black folks didn't have capital at all. They had no capital. And still, white folks went out of their way to steal and destroy any possibility of rights or futures. And then we watched it happen again with why were DEI initiatives even made? Because no white people were hiring Black folks. It didn't matter how much more robust those resumes and CVs were, the miracles that it took to get there. And what does that mean? What does that mean, right? To take that away. But again, that's not even the best argument that I'll be making, right? Of course, we keep being like, well, I just don't get, and we just think, oh, it's just a couple of bad actors. It's not just the sensibility. You either are apathetic towards race for any number of reasons, right? Or you understand that there is just no way. I guess what I'm saying is we have to confront the Negro problem because nothing works if we don't. Again, it is so unbelievably weird that this has not come up, that it's not the first thing on all of our lips, right? Okay. So, and let me just have a sip of water. Okay. Let me ask you something. Let's argue. Let's make the case, right? Because folks on the left, and this is the vast majority of the left, these are all the Bernie bros onward, right? The vast majority of people on the left, they say class is more important than race because class will raise up, you know, the best quality of life for the most people. And that's also just by default going to include Black people. So we don't even need to talk about race. You don't need to play your little identity politics here, right? I can't tell you how much I wanted that to be true. As a whole nignog, beautiful, right? Tiny, but furious. I was like, hell yeah, I don't want to talk about this shit. I'm done. I'm done talking about this because if there's any way around talking about race as a Black person, I'm running for it. I'm Jackie Joyner-Chris. I'm going. I'm Gail Devers. I'm going. I want it. I want out. But I tried it their way. And it's not because there was racisms that happened. Nobody hurts me. You know what I mean? I love the people I love. Nobody, my jaw's not made of glass. I've been in every room. I've met more people in my life than most people will meet if they lived 7, because of how it happened, right? So for the sake of argument, I will say I've become race first, right? For the sake of the argument, I've become race first. Okay, cool. What is class first achieved? What has that approach achieved across the left? What rights and protections have been gained of any significance on federal level? well, it wasn't antitrust, and it definitely was. So women's rights definitely wasn't LGBTQ rights. Cool. So it actually hasn't accomplished fucking anything meaningful. How do I know? Because when I look at what came out of race first, okay, cool. The bedrock for all civil rights for everyone in America that has been leveraged and used to grant rights to women, to grant rights to the LGBTQ community, down to disabled folks. What do you think provided the bedrock and the justification? What do you think set the precedent for that? It was Black Americans, dude. It seems like, I could be wrong. Everything else I'm about to say tells otherwise, but it almost seems like race first, which is not the framing I'm going to use, right? But for the sake of the argument, it almost seems like race first is actually the most successful way. But you don't want that to be true. For a while, I didn't want that to be true. And the job is to figure out what's inside of us. Why? Because I'm sorry, it's not, right? It's not like internalized racism. That's so stupid. And it's definitely not whatever the fuck D'Angelo was talking about. I'm about to tear that shit apart too. Don't worry, y'all. Stick with me though, because as much as I sound furious, I'm actually not. This is something clicked for me today. And I just realized that the matter of it is very obviously serious. The matter of race and racism is very serious. But that doesn't mean that just because something's hard doesn't mean it's not good or worthwhile. And that's what America instills, this idea that if something is just hard or not convenient or a challenge, then you're not safe. You don't feel good anymore. Something about your boundaries or fucking, I don't know, self-care, whatever bullshit we've been using. And it's nonsense. Here's my thing. Class first. Who won? Now you can say it's a bunch of these other things, right? You could, and again, we don't have a cap on political spending. Number one, right? That alone. But the fact that even still the Electoral College itself, where did that come from? Okay, right. What eliminates anything impactful with the popular vote? Oh, right. The Electoral College. Well, why did we? Oh, right. Concessions made to the insurrectionist racists. And we've been making all those concessions ever since. But no, let's do class first. Okay, great. Let me dead this once and for all because I just need us to be fucking normal. Okay? There is, because I like books. I love books. So I decided, we have said this thing. We have said over and over again. Yeah, the poor whites choose. They choose against their own interest. That, again, it's not that it's incorrect. It's just not a good enough argument. We have to find a different framing because it's been overdone. Truth of it doesn't land. My job is to think about what does. But first, I need to make sure that I understand exactly how it's right. Okay? Because what's interesting? When do white people talk about being class first? And they're talking about white people on the left. Right? So liberal to left. When do they talk about class first? Right? Almost exclusively when it comes to race. When else do they talk about it? Because, and when I say race, again, what does it become synonymous with? Because they're not talking about, even though, well, it seems to me like that's who you ought to be preoccupied with, since that seems to me to be the folks who constantly vote to make this place a living hell. But you keep blaming black folks for losing, even though black people keep, the old guard in particular, they vote Democrat, they vote Democrat, they vote Democrat. You don't talk to them at all. You don't engage with them at all. You can't deal with black folks. And by the way, I am going to talk about the culture that many black folks have made both intentionally, but I think mostly non-intentionally, because again, we've all been bad at this race stuff. It's just that the seriousness of it and the significance of it is most felt. So Black Americans maybe not managing it well seems to make a lot of sense since, I don't know, it stole, what's the amount of money? What's the amount of money that's owed? Like how much was stolen, right? Because now we get a sense. Look at all what Elon Musk has and Jeff Bezos has, right? So cumulatively, if black folks had been allowed Black Americans have been allowed to continue, right? And we know that Black people, including Black middle class people, continuously vote for better wages, better protections. That's why 65% of federal workers were Black women. Who do you think was pushing through these initiatives, these changes in policy? They're these unsung heroes that we just take for fucking granted. And they were the first folks devastated by this slew of firings, right? How many generations will be impacted by DI? I wish we could talk about DI. You want to know why? Because we don't even talk about the Black middle class, because isn't that odd that the class first people don't talk about the Black middle class? Do they even talk about the white middle class? No, because it's all about judging from the rafters. But again, you don't have to think about the Black middle class. You can, because you take for granted the fact that you came from the middle class. The majority of white people in lib to lefty spaces are coming from middle and upper class backgrounds. There's nothing wrong with that. I don't mind it. I think it's good. I actually, it helps me at different points in time. I've met a lot of great people along the way. I've met a lot of great everyone along the way. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for those, especially white people who helped socialize me in a lot of ways. But also removed some of the things that I couldn't interpret or understand, like taxes. I come from complete poverty, not the kind that people cosplay, but the kind where you're sleeping more than you're awake because you're malnourished, or the kind that ends you in being homeless or being in group homes or being in women's shelters, like that kind of poverty, So how much was stolen? Okay, let's put up what I actually know. How, like, can we quantify? Because I started to really think we don't even talk about the Black middle class, and Black people don't talk about it anymore. It used to be talked about, but then it's almost like the constant beating down for pushing a racial agenda, which is the only way that people have won anything here historically. Again, we're talking about rights and protections, which are the things that are on the chopping block for everybody. From disabled folks to women to the LGBTQ community, right down to Black folks. But we will talk about LGBT community, and the buck stops there. We don't talk about disability or disabled folks at all. We don't talk about women, and we don't talk about race. So for me, I like to go to those places. The most incendiary one, of course, is So when we said DI, I cracked jokes about it. Said the planes were falling from the sky. Sure missed that DI. Sure missed that woke. You know what I didn't hear? I didn't hear anything about how the rollback of those initiatives that Black women pushed for, that everybody benefited from, white women most of all, which everyone's quick to mention, as if that meant that it doesn't matter. We should toss it away. I started to think about, when it comes to like the Black middle class, it's not the same as the white middle class. It's spread over, because anytime you make any money, you share it. Your family needs it. Your family needs help. You've been isolated and cared for, unwanted. I mean, I think about my mom dying. I think about the fact that just generally things are harder for me. I can't sit and stream for 12 hours a day because my mom and dad aren't going to feed me and take care of me while I do it. And by the way, I'm talking about Hassan. I'm not talking about like a 14-year-old. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just acknowledging that it's so much harder when you lack resources, access to resources. And that wasn't any failure on anybody's part today. That was decades in the making. But today, we seem just as uninterested in solving the Negro problem as anybody was back then. But I started to think about what that meant for post-secondary. I started to think about what the loss of income meant, how the extended family would be devastated, that people would die because they couldn't access medication, and suddenly it wasn't a joke anymore. I'm going to make DI jokes until I die, but I'm not going to make them until I'm fighting for it again. And we turned it into a joke. That's the part that I don't get. We turned it into a joke. So now that's me just thinking about DEI initiatives, destruction and the attacks against the Black. The right understands really well what happens when Black people, start mobilizing, which I already showed you the indicators are there, right? But they understand that's why they've gone above and beyond to attack on every fucking level you can imagine. No population is more singularly impacted by Trump's agenda. This whole entire administration agenda, Project 2025, more than Black people. And it's the one population we're just not talking about? Black Americans? Like, what does that say about us? So, okay, let's put this little couple of years in context. Okay. So if we had allowed Black Americans to continue on from Reconstruction, even though hundreds of years of wealth were still generated by white people and spread out in the economy, you were writing, yeah, the economy was doing good because you had capital. How'd you have capital? Because you use Black people to build it. Again, we're being honest, and which is the vision of America that I'm interested in. We would be honest. We'd say slaves built America and immigrants clean it. If you don't like how it sounds, you shouldn't. We should be changing that. But we can't if we can't even fucking say it. So how much money? Okay, cool. So if Black Americans were to receive reparations, which again is treated like a fucking joke, but again, it already fucking happened. It happened. It wasn't reparations in the way that's being argued now, but that's because something that allowed for Black folks, Black Americans to literally become part of America, well, white people didn't want that. So the framing of reparations changed with that. And now so much time has gone by. So how much? 13 to 14 trillion dollars. 13 to 14 trillion dollars. That's not my number, that's economists, right? And I'm going to name some of those economists because I care about due diligence. So after a reparation study, and this is, by the way, house.gov from 2020, it's a full study. It's still there. I have downloaded it because I don't trust any of them. It's 24 pages. Cool. I'm just actually making sure I save it. After reparations, studies suggest $151 million for each African American. Experts say money alone isn't enough. But I want you to think about that, right? Now, you don't have this in your pocket. Most of you, white folks listening to this, probably none of you, for being honest. And even if you do, it's okay. Like it's actually fine. Like you didn't do anything. Maybe that's where some of that guilt comes from. But again, I'm going to punch that in the throat because it's not useful. But you didn't do anything. It's not your fault that this is the way things go. But 151 million. That means that for each African American, for each Black American, that's the cumulative wealth that every single one of them who are descendants of enslaved people. Imagine how much further, what that would look like. We used to talk about closing the racial wealth gap. You know how we don't talk about that anymore? That was part of the discourse in 2008, 2010, 2012. Somewhere along the line, it really changed. I would argue around 2015, 2016. I'd argue around the time that Sanders came around. And everybody from lib to left decided that identity politics was the reason why we can't win in America across the left. And again, it was the bastardized, propagandized version of identity politics, which was just blaming Black people. But Black people are the only reason that anybody has a fucking anything at all here. When it comes down to rights. Definitely not when it comes down to wealth, though. $151 million. That's every single descendant. And that is just, that's not going to be the high end. They're going to go for the lowest possible end. Oh, it's not possible. It is, because we have billionaires in 2026. It actually completely is. They're just make shit up. There's lots of initiatives, lots of ways that, but we don't even take that seriously. But you know what? That's another conversation for another day. Let me keep hitting the facts. Now, okay, we can say, well, they were old whites. Those are not the new whites. They're not the new whites. Cool. Okay. So Again, right now, as we speak, there are unrelenting attacks on the Civil Rights Act. Talked about Black people have done, Black Americans have done it, full body of work, documenting the ways in which Jim Crow era policies, plantation prisons expanded into the prison industrial complex, point of having people, Black Americans in particular, cycling in and out. The point of keeping Black Americans poor was so that they could keep being used for the money that they generated for the country. But now it's really specific individuals, right? Private sector is booming. I don't know how it all started, to be honest. So, said back in the day, let me destroy this once and for all. Okay, so I'm going to name some names. And again, this is for all the class first people. This is for you. If more people had more, and again, who's the majority population in this country? For now, whites, but who has been historically white people? Right? Very important. Okay, so this is what I don't hear from any of these class first people. They never say, they always talk about identity politics. They never talk about the fact, right, that anywhere where federal funds are highest in the South, anywhere today, anywhere at all, the government becomes more and more conservative. How do you make that make sense? So where people receive the most aid, right? Where people receive the most aid, where it's white folks, historically, and majority today, those governments become more conservative. That's curious, right? That's really curious. Let's look at Kentucky for a second. Now, I'm going to go through this example really quickly because the other shit just blows it out of the water. But I did pick up some materials. So I got Susan Mettler, who's a professor of government at Cornell. So she wrote The Government Citizen Disconnect. I also want to flag, before we go, before we keep going on, actually, you know what? I'll just organically tell you citations as I go. Okay. So one of the things that she talks about is, Kentucky, this is in 2018, by the way, that's when it came out, the median household income that ranked 45th of the 50 states. So receiving a lot of aid, right? For the past half century, become more and more reliant on the federal government. In the 70s, federal programs provided slightly under 10% of personal income for Kentucky residents. By 2015. Money from programs ranging from welfare to Medicaid to Social Security and Medicare more than doubled to 23% as a share of Kentuckians' personal income. So this is important to know. Why the 1970s? Well, that's when corporations went global, where a certain subset of lawyer and shadow movers in American Congress and around it decided to make the U.S. currency the default currency of the globe, right? Globalization, we're now going to have things built elsewhere super, super cheap and steal resources from over here. And by the way, Americans, you're going to pay for all of it, but you get nothing back in return. In fact, your whole middle class, gone. All your factory work, done. It costs too much money. You're too expensive, right? So that's partly why in the 1970s you saw that steady increase. Again, everything that we're talking about is in every one of these episodes is connected, and every time we can go back, right? I know you're doing that in your brain too. So 20 years ago, there's only one county out of 120 where residents counted on the federal government for at least 40% of the personal income. By 2014, 28 counties were at 40% or higher. So we're seeing a steady rise in the need for federal support, okay? So what happened, right? Because those things are liberal things, right? Medicare, Medicaid, SNAP, or welfare state things. That's weird, right? But as the claims on these federal dollars rose, those states the states' voters in particular became increasingly conservative. So it's not, oh, well, just representatives in the government. No, the states themselves became more conservative, right? Why? And by the 90s, they were electing hard-right, anti-government politicians who were determined to cut the programs their constituents were trying to were actually relying on, needing Why is that? So Mettler breaks down shit that, I don't know. There's an example of Republican Congressman Andy Barr, right? So he represents the 6th District. It's Wolf County, 52% of income, approximately $12,000 per resident, flows from federal social policies. Here's a name that we know more temporarily. Thomas Massey, right? 4th District, also Republican. This is a quote from him. Resides in Lewis County, in which 43% of income comes from federal government transfers, right? Massey notes that the population there stridently opposes social welfare spending as government as well, having been among the group of Republicans who forced the end of the long tradition of bipartisan cooperation on the Farm Bill in 2013 because they opposed its inclusion of the food stamp program. That's interesting. Why would they oppose the inclusion of the food stamp program that they were all relying on? What happened there? What happened? I'm going to jump to a more in the throat. I don't want a book that just talks about the South. I want a book that's by economists. Like, I'm glad that she's a government bird, but I want a book with the economists, right? Because really quickly before I move on, like, what's going on with Kentucky voters, right? That stands out because Kentucky is one of the whitest states in America entirely. It's actually exceptionally white, one might call it, right? 84.6%. Compared with 60.7% nationally. Got a low median household income, so people aren't making so much money, right? 55 is 44 there. It's 55 pretty much everywhere else. And again, these are numbers in 2018. Higher poverty rate than anywhere else nationally. Fewer college graduates than anywhere nationally, right? Why would their government? Why would the voters and then the government become more conservative? That's really interesting. So let's go to The Economist. So that book was written in 2018, but I like to go back. I like to go back. Right? 2004. I had to I was like, where the fuck did I make this book up? Fighting Poverty in the US and Europe, A World of Difference. It's really interesting when these comparisons are made, right? Like the way that, like I've mentioned, and we played clips on different episodes and stuff, but I want you to think about Piers Morgan and Tucker Carlson. Remember how fucking hysterical Tucker was? That stupid hair. Why doesn't it move naturally? Like, how? I don't know, but it's like bad hair is just a part of their thing. But it's kind of grown on me with him because he looks stupid. He's a stupid man, and stupid man should look stupid. I feel very strongly about that. Anyway, do you remember how hysterical Tucker Carlson came about? Because Piers was like, I don't feel as impassioned about this as you. It's kind of weird that you do. I think diversity made England better. You do? You're the one who's racist, not me. Like, do you remember that? Okay, great. So the comparison is key here, okay? Because too often it's the class first things. It's just like, well, this is just what happens, and this is just, yeah, but the thing is, we're not over there, right? Oh, the naggers, not there. Anyway, so two folks, Fighting Poverty in the US and Europe, A World of Difference. Alessina and Edward L. Esser. He is an economist at Harvard, they found pronounced pattern in the United States, right? Oh, sorry, they found a pattern here. Yeah. States with more African Americans are less generous to the poor. Okay. That's a little vague for me. I thought, let's get deeper. Okay. So, more specifically, The Economist. Oh, sorry. I got confused. I was like, why is that one name? There's two people. Let me tell you exactly. Alberto F. Alessina and Paula Giuliano. Thank you. Oh, Jesus Christ. That was tough. That's what I want to say. Now, they wrote this thing, the people I mentioned earlier, but this is where I wanted to be. Okay. So they have an answer, actually. They have an answer. I think it's pretty important. Race. The answer is just race. this is a quote from the book, race is an extremely important determinant of preferences for redistribution. And that's like federal distribution of funds or redistribution of wealth. Where the poor are disproportionately concentrated in a racial minority, the majority prefer less redistribution. They are saying that where white people are the majority and there's a concentration of a racial minority. So it's not 6 or 10 random immigrants or black people. We're using black immigrants. No. It's they don't want it. I want you to think now about what changed in Kentucky. This is another quote: unpleasant but nevertheless widely observed fact that individuals are more generous towards others who are similar to them racially, ethnically, and linguistically. Cool, right? So today, as of right now, this is just a little bolstering so you know. We could go in on fact after fact, but we don't need that, right? There are some ideas, like facts don't need to be defended. They need to be said, and we're not even saying them. The people and the story of who we are, the homeland versus America, whatever framing, whatever, that needs to be defended. A belief system needs to be defended. Facts, they just stand on their own. We kept this thing, well, it's my truth. Well, then you tell your truth. Fuck off. All right, so right now, the states with the lowest ceiling on maximum grants in the Temporary Assistance to Needy Families Program, which replaced traditional welfare in 1996, are in the region with the highest percentages of African Americans. The South and are overwhelmingly represented at the state and federal level by conservative Republicans, right? There's a map of this. By the way, there's an article from 2018 that cites the Old Bird's book. There's a lot of information in my head, sorry. Mettler, thank you. Okay, that cites Mettler's book, so it makes sense because it came out in 2018. And by the way, there's a graph, and it's a New York Times opinion. Okay, so let me keep cooking because we're getting to the tail end of this. So we got to go. Okay, so I'm going to explain to you now how we completely dismantle this because the facts aren't simply enough, right? I like smart people, but I really wanted economists because anything else is too easily dismissed. I mean, these are the class first people after all. I want to really respect their beliefs. So I went to the economists to find out what the problem is. It turns out that it actually is about race. So there was a paper by Ilyana Kuziemko. Right? This is an economist at Princeton. You'll note that I also found people that these folks really think highly of, right? By the way, I love all nerds. But again, years and peers are significant. I'm also pulling from Tally Reich. I try not to, I was like, ugh, it just causes tension in my, just hearing Reich, I'm like, ah. But Tally Reich, a professor of marketing at Yale. I'm also going to be citing Ryan W. Buell and Michael Norton, okay? Both at Harvard Business School. Are these heavy enough names for us? Are these big enough names for us? Can we say, like, these are all economists? You can look up their work. It's all there because I'm working diligently to prove class first, because the only way to disprove something is to fully try to prove it in the best way you can. So I went to the fucking experts, okay? They introduced two concepts, right? In fact, Kuziemko's paper is called this last place aversion. I was like, oh. So again, all these folks, professor of marketing at Yale, right? Economists and economists, Princeton, of course, Harvard Business School. They describe this phenomenon, this last place aversion, right? They describe this phenomenon in which relatively low income individuals oppose redistribution because they fear it might differentially help a last place group to whom they can currently feel superior. But I thought if more people had more of their needs met, which happened in the South and which happened across, because what's great about these folks, and they're not citing simply the South, they're citing the entire country. And what I loved about the paper before that, it was comparing it to Europe, which I might cite down the line. Again, we're getting close to a natural conclusion. But it seems to me that the class experts say again and again that the issue is race. It's just the left that doesn't believe that, doesn't want to believe that, doesn't care to believe it because it's too hard. Losers, loser behavior. When has something being hard been? Being alive is hard, bitch. Have you been alive today? Rough. It's also awesome. It's a mixed bag. All right, let's keep going. I just couldn't. Okay, it goes on. Those thus positioned, right? These are the people who feel superior. Exhibit a particular aversion to being in last place, such that a potential drop in rank creates the greatest disutility for those already near the bottom of the distribution. So let me just put it differently, right? Among the findings of this group of researchers, these are the findings. Who are the people making just above the minimum wage are most likely to oppose its increase? People who need it the most. But they had more. We gave them more. The funding increased over and over and over again. And it was the things that we're fighting for: Medicaid, SNAP, Medicare. But they said that if we fought so that more people had more, then it would automatically, but it didn't actually. It didn't at all. And this is from the greatest economists, well, certainly from the greatest institutions in the world. Oh, interesting. Okay, cool. Applying last place aversion theory to means-tested federal programs for the poor reveals that the group most likely to voice opposition is made up of relatively poor whites right above the cutoff level to qualify for such programs. The other theory that they present is deservingness. And this is where I would argue every person that has either accepted or been socialized under this white sensibility, which is one of hyper-individualism, bootstraps, and all, post-race, all that nonsense, right? Which, again, when you think about, they stole $14 trillion from Black Americans, but think about how much billionaires have stolen from everybody. What amount of money, and I'll come up with a figure, I'll look to these economists, what amount of money was taken from Americans who are never made stakeholders and yet somehow keep supporting this homeland bullshit dream where only the very, very wealthy keep doing well, right? And keep stealing from everybody else. But as long as you can steal from Black folks, you're okay? Weird. And you know what's so interesting? What tools are you guys using, these like libs to leftists? What tools are you using to fight? What imagery? What theory? What chants? Oh, they're all Black American. They're all part of the Black American lexicon. Weird. Did you talk to Black people? No. Okay, cool. Just checking. So what's the other side? Deservingness, right? White Americans, more than citizens of other nations, right? I've talked about this, but I like data to substantiate what I'm saying. Distinguish between those they view as deserving and those who are undeserving. And they're much more willing to support aid for those that they see as deserving, of course. Who's that? That's themselves. I love this. This is a Boston University School of Law, by the way. 2017, the deserving poor, the undeserving poor, and class-based affirmative action. As you know, I like to read dissertations in my spare time. Okay, great. So I'm going to pause here because I've just given us a bunch of information. And I'm going to round it out back on us, right? I'm not interested in your fault, my fault, this fault. We've all been doing this very badly. Some people with far greater implications, but still, I'm not, it really, the setup was the problem. The setup was the problem. But we've continued to accept that setup, and I'm fed up of the setup, personally. So let's go back to where we started, okay? Black people want, I think, oftentimes when we enter conversations around race, and I'm going to substantiate some of these things. I think it is my hypothesis, because no one ever talked meaningfully to me about race. Most people that I know, or whatever, it's just how to navigate. I mean, the way that we experience it is almost always spontaneous, right? Somebody is calling you a nigger. Somebody is pointing out that you must have been the poor one. Somebody is talking about your bad hair. Somebody is calling you ugly for being dark. Somebody, it just is always spontaneous. And so we have almost a hypervigilance. But imagine how many times that happens in a race-based society that pretends that it's not. That also continues the same racist belief system and bullshit that came about post, not just post Reconstruction, but chattel slavery and the abolishment of it. Because again, you were both pro-slavery or anti-slavery. They all believed the same thing. The Black people weren't really fully people. But that was just a really ugly system. Yeah, you don't want to see. So what did they do? They just put Black people where they couldn't be seen when they're in cages, so that you didn't have to look at it. But they weren't going to lose their bottom line. When have they ever lost their bottom line? The question is, when did we stop looking? Remember when we used to talk about the prison industrial complex? Remember we used to talk about it all the time? What do you think has led to the expansion of detention centers, or ICE even? Okay, cool. Just making sure. So what ends up happening is you go through all of these experiences where you have been handled and treated so carelessly by white people, when you have had to be so careful every step of every day of your life. Because what you learn very early as a Black person, I'd argue, true, there's different ways that people learn, like disabled folks learn, poor people learn. Always hear me. When I talk about Black, I want you to hear the universalness, because the Black experience is universal. That's why the Black sensibility can hold all these places. White sensibilities can't. They also, I'm like, you're not even happy. You have everything. Not you. We're on the same page. You got the Black sensibility. I'm talking about the extremely, 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 extreme. I'm not even talking about actors, y'all. We are so past that. About people, millionaires. And you know what I mean? It's about the people who we're living in the vision of society that like 6 people want. That's just not us. And they're such fucking weenies. They're such losers. Okay, anyway. So, we've been treated so carelessly, but what we understand is consequence. And we understand consequence very, very early. Because the consequences, they make themselves apparent immediately. Black children become aware of this as soon as the world becomes aware of them. White people are taught not to talk about race. So not only did I come from a generation where race, like the assumption was that I was Black. I knew I was Black. I lived primarily in a Black community, but it was a white person. It was a white kid who told me that I was Black, and I didn't know what that meant. But I knew that when we don't talk about it and you're hearing it for the first time, it's pointed out as a difference. And there's usually, and I'm being polite, there's usually a negative connotation to it. In my case, it also happened to follow with some bullshit, but we were kids. But what it did inside, I understood that I was different. I understood that there was something wrong with that, etc. Blah, 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 blah. And then what our response that has been, we've seen the limits of that. I now have this thing where I'm looking at the time and I think I ought to wrap here, and maybe I'll leave you with this thing hanging overhead. Where I will be going in on Robin DiAngelo's work. I want to find more on this, like, have we been so bad? But I really hope, because this is just my first stab at it, and there's more. There's literally so much more that talks about, that puts this whole last first thing to bed. I think the most damning thing is, like, what has it achieved? You have all the resources. You definitely didn't make it about race. You keep saying that we do, but that's just because Black Americans exist. The only time you talk about Black Americans is, or the most consistent way that I've observed and experienced this, and that's years of study, and that's contemporary leftist, has largely been about identity politics, not about anything. You don't talk to Black people. They're not on your platforms. I think you have a Black problem. I think you have a Negro problem. More accurately, I think you have a problem with Negroes. And we're not going to win a damn fucking thing. We don't confront it. So I'll leave tomorrow's work. There's more. But I love you all very much. Thank you to Corey for making us look good, feel good. I appreciate you just letting me, because, I have been enjoying the anecdotal nature of this, but it's not useful to talk about Reconstruction. If you can't, what's the point of talking about Black history? If you can't even talk about Black people now, this part has to open up so that the information can be received and received differently. Because we're filtering it through all this negativity and all this hardship. And actually, like, this is where possibility exists. Can we be the first generation ever to really confront and address the Negro problem? I think we can. Love you all very much, and I can't wait.